My name is Ted Gutierrez, and I'm in the business of helping major executives talk down to the shop floor as it relates to cybersecurity assessments. So, whether it's OT, whether it's IT, whether it's critical infrastructure in the manufacturing space, or whether it's in the chemical space, one of the things that I have the pleasure of constantly doing is helping people understand what are the next steps after a cyber assessment, um, how to do a cyber assessment more effectively. And that's because my particular background, I was an auditor for many years. I was and I'll tell a little bit more in a second slide, but when I thought about what are the actionable things that a lot of executives as well as OT and IT security leaders wish they knew a little bit more about is how do I make sure that a cyber assessment is a valuable component of my day-to-day job. A lot of times, cyber assessments become a compliance activity. They become an activity that someone does every year or every other year. They become an activity that everybody sort of has to do, and they try to do it okay, but they really seldom focus on making them a truly dynamic component of their what I could like to call their go to secure strategy. And so I have the pleasure of doing this on a regular basis. So I wanted to talk a little bit today about what are the actionable things that I have seen work really well when an organization is trying to level up to the next phase of maturity. Cyber assessments are a very unique activity, whether it's a risk assessment, whether it's a cyber a safety assessment, whether it's controls based, whether it's risk based. What assessments do is they tend to create and validate the various service or product needs that a given team has. And that's important because whether you're on the shop floor as a new OT or an automation leader, whether you are transitioning into a leader, cyber assessments are always a tool that you can use to communicate the current state and the desired future state. The challenge is that most people overthink it really early on. And my job today is to tell you a little bit about what I think has worked with some of the various asset owners that I've had the pleasure of working with. So this is not an ultra technical presentation. Um, this is more of a business-oriented discussion that focuses on alignment, it focuses on clarity, and it also will focus on the core deliverables that you need to really progress your program to the next level. So there's really 4 to 5 different things that we're going to talk about, what I consider key learning objectives. One of them is going to focus on the actual, how do you do the actual assessment from a controls perspective? The next is kind of working with that and pulling it into a full schema. The next is going to be about how do I engage better? And then ultimately, how do I translate these into executive ready priorities? If you have any questions, I look forward to taking them towards the end of the presentation. But let's dive in. So, like Paul and team had mentioned, I work in the business of helping people make sense of cybersecurity assessments and dynamic governance programs. And when it really comes down to what I do on a regular basis, is I'm helping people do small bits of reconnaissance all over their world. I'm an Army guy. I was in the military for many years. And so the idea of following a standard, understanding what the standard's supposed to be, and deploying that standard effectively, it's very natural to me. And so after my time in the Army, I actually became an auditor for Shell. And at one point, I had done almost 200 different assessments and audits in a given year all over the world. And what the challenge was is I had understood very clearly how to take a current standard and deploy that across an assessment, validate whether or not the different controls were being met, validate whether that program was really effective. But where I started to really scratch my head and decide that this is where I wanted to spend the rest of my professional career, it was when I really was having a challenge modernizing that into a dynamic risk program or a dynamic governance program. And so I decided to jump headfirst into that part of the industry. And what that has given me the opportunity to do is see a lot of different cyber frameworks, see a lot of different cyber standards, and deal with a lot of folks that are trying to answer one specific question. That is, how do I make sure that a cyber assessment really projects my team to the next level instead of it just being kind of a compliance exercise? Now, why does this really matter? The number one reason why this matters is because cyber assessments help you make sense of what do I need to go and do? What do I need to go and buy? What is the state of my current facility is in? So the thing that is most important when you are starting a cybersecurity assessment program or trying to transition it is we really need to go back to basics, and that is what is the actual framework or the standard that I'm going to use. Now, the first mistake that I see people making when they focus on cybersecurity assessments, when they do so in a manufacturing type situation, whether it's one facility or you have 400 facilities, all with different levels of criticality, is that they try to go a little bit too deep, too fast. Um, Risk-based cyber assessments are ultimately much more challenging and complex than a controls-based standard. And where I see most people making a mistake is they try to do too large of an assessment. It takes up too many resources to go and execute that one assessment. Because the planning and the actual deployment of the assessment did not go as smooth as they want, the results are not exactly as timely as they need. There's fatigue across the deployment of the entire assessment. And what always happens is that by the time you get to the end of assessment, you're so exhausted and you want to look at some sort of visualization, then everyone sort of forgets why they were there. The number one way that I see that happening is a new CISO or a new OT manager comes in, says that they want to just get a clean look at everything that they have out there, and they deploy an extremely complex framework or standard in a few sites, maybe just one. And sometimes they utilize the support of some sort of consultant organization, some sort of someone who has a lot of experience. And all of these things are fine. The challenge is that if you don't deploy a scalable assessment framework across the majority of all of your sites, you're not going to have a very good understanding of the baselining there. So the first thing that I would always say is a key learning objective to transition in 180 days a cybersecurity program that really works and really drives your company forward. The first thing I would do is I would simplify what your cyber assessment is. Here's a great example. If you want to take a standard NIST CSF as your standard of choice or your framework of choice, just pick one. Let's assume that that cyber assessment has shall or it has should statements that map to, let's just say, 100 different cyber controls and 100 different cyber questions. I won't get into the details of all the different frameworks and standards that are out there, but if you had to choose between doing that assessment effectively at 10 to 20% of your sites across every cyber control, but you said, what if I only evaluated 50% of the cyber controls, but I could guarantee that I would look at every single one of my sites? Contemplate that for a second. If you minimize the actual depth of the assessment, if you simplified exactly what you're asking, what you're reviewing, what you're evaluating, would that give you the ability to do a larger scope of assessments, incorporating more people? What I usually find is that there's an inverse correlation with scale within your cyber assessment program and the depth of that cyber assessment program. And this is why when someone deploys an ISO IEC 62443-3-2, a lot of their resources go to one specific site, maybe two specific sites. They put all of that effort in. They have to understand their zones and conduits. They have to understand what their threat matrix is. They have to understand what their overall risk models are. That takes a lot of resources. And there's nothing, and there is a time and a place for very in-depth risk assessments. But if you have 180 days, you're either new to your job, you're new to the role, maybe you guys made some acquisitions, and you have to truly expand your program. My recommendation is to simplify your standard that you're using, configure it to match your own particular needs, and try to go as wide as possible for as many sites. The reason that you want to do that is because very seldom, unless it's a critical moneymaker for the organization, and I mean moneymaker like you have 12 manufacturing sites, but only two of them make all your core revenue, and the other 10 are your feeder sites, Very seldom does doing one extremely in-depth assessment at one of two of those facilities that utilize all of your resources, very seldom does that create a programmatic or strategic approach to your cyber assessment program. So you have to make some very key decisions. Do I want to assess all of my different sites? I can't do every single site as deep as my top money makers. I don't have the resources of team. I don't have the resources of time, and I surely don't have the budget. So you have to kind of balance, how do I get more of my sites baselined across my entire facility? And in order to do that, the less complex that you make your cyber assessment framework, the better. The way that you should be thinking about scaling the framework or the standard is, take whatever standard you have, and I would focus on a controls-based approach in a fewer number of controls that can potentially be more controls or fewer controls mapped to the same standard for the different criticalities of your different sites. This is ultimately to say that if you want to scale, don't be afraid to scale back on the actual assessment and what you're developing. Consultants that do this every single day, they do this very naturally. And so the best way to get a consultant organization to help you is to say, if I have to meet this compliance mandate and I have to run this sort of risk-based approach, but I have to simplify it to scale, how would I do it? That is going to start eliminating some low-hanging fruit cyber components or controls that you may not need to assess in year one. So in closing, for our first critical control here is, you have to be able to make sure that you have the same cyber assessment framework being deployed across all your different sites. And if you have a huge number of sites, simplify the framework. When you simplify the framework, when you go from a 200 questionnaire to maybe a 48, when you maybe transition away from a risk-based assessment to a controls-based assessment, when we try to drive simplicity, why are we doing it? Are we doing it because we discredit or we don't believe that all the controls are as valuable? No. You're doing it because, remember, your job in this particular document, in this particular effort, is 180 days. I want to really accelerate my cyber assessment program, turn it into a program rather than just a one-time project. You have to have your frontline teams engaged in order to do that. The way to get in your teams engaged is make these assessments very simple and actionable. Now, there's a lot of different ways you can do that. You can have folks only participate in the questions or the components of the assessments that they want, or that they are kind of privy to, or that's within their job role. You can also digitize some of these efforts. You can try to do some training to make sure that your OT person or your security person at all the various sites are engaged. But your goal is that if you make frontline teams, and I'm thinking about this in a distributed manufacturing site capacity, if you keep these folks top of mind about, John's never done a cyber assessment, Sally's never done a cyber assessment, how do I make sure that they're engaged? You're going to have a much different kind of cyber assessment experience, whether you are doing assessments on behalf of your sites, whether you're asking them to participate in the cyber assessment. The deliverable that you're looking for is a playbook that ultimately is going to get them engaged in a cyber assessment, even if it means they're answering one question alongside you, with you, or on your behalf. Why that's very important is because ultimately you are going to want ownership in the recognition of that cyber control, because the sites are either going to have the operational expenditure money or the CapEx money to deploy the resources, time, budget, and people to implement that cyber control, and you want them on board from the get-go. What I see too often happening, and it's not for the fault of a cyber team, but this is generally what happens, is that we have a distributed network of sites. The cyber assessor could be a consultant or it could be a corporate team. it either travels or sends Excel files or sends a digitized engagement to all the different sites, says complete the cyber assessment. And the first thing happens is, I didn't know that this was going to happen, or I didn't know that this was important. And if that's the case, then you're not going to be having the driving the participation. The first thing that you do when you try to, in 180 days, create a real true program is you got to get in front of those frontline folks. You have to communicate, this is our end state that we're trying to achieve, and engage in the frontline teams before the assessment ever takes place. The fastest and best way to do that is to get operational leadership to be on that CC line, or get the operational leadership of all those facilities, the P&L manager, to communicate, this is a priority for this year, this month, this quarter. And ultimately, the more time that you can spend with those particular personnel, the better. The utopia that you seek in this 180-day engagement is make sure that people don't scratch their head and say, I didn't know this was happening. And you are going to be the best judge of how to do that. But if we're starting to stack how to get there, the first thing, of course, is you got to simplify and standardize that framework or that standard of choice. Now, because you standardized it, you go to these frontline teams and you really tell them and you share with them the vision. And the vision is very clear. We have a distributed network of manufacturing sites. We are a corporate entity, or we are the security leader. And without you engaging in this cyber assessment, we're just a corporate team. And so what we're going to do is we standardized our program from an assessment. Now we need to standardize how we're going to take those assessments, and we need your help. That's the way to get these folks to try to understand what we're really trying to do. So simplify the assessment and schema. Number two, try to get your frontline teams engaged without overwhelming them. Tons of ways to do that, but that has to be one of the cornerstones of a 180-day program to really get your assessment program off the ground. Number three, when you think about cybersecurity, and when you think about the who within cybersecurity and the what within cybersecurity, there is a natural tendency to try to complete or make our visualizations very technical. This is where people probably lose the most ground when it comes to a cyber assessment program, is that they have been working in the vulnerability management, the asset inventory world, the threats and the alerts world. They're used to boxes that plug in at every layer of the network, and they see some sort of visualizations that's super technical. Reverse your mindset when it comes to a program that really scales when it comes to assessments. And it comes down to one very simple thing. Leadership tend to like pictures, and leadership tend to approve budgets where pictures help them see what they're going to get out of it. If you can do anything well, it is get away from the technical minutia of everything that you have done in the cyber assessment process and translate it into metrics that leadership can really use to do the two things that they want you to do. They know that you need to fix this, and they know that they have the funding to get you to fix it. And the real trick in 180 days, if you really want to maximize your cyber program and take it to the next level, is create a way, whether it's through PowerPoint, whether it's through a digital solution, whether it's actually hiring a contractor to do this or building it internal, is you have to paint a picture effectively of how all of the controls that you've assessed through all of the input from all the major players have created a landing page of all the things that you're going to need to do to solve it. And the more simplified that you can make that approach in your deliverable, the more success you're going to have getting leadership to tune in. So imagine a world where we have done an amazing job doing one or two facilities in the most hardcore, risk-oriented, threat matrix, ultra complex assessment. And we come back to them, leadership, we said, we have done the greatest risk assessment that has ever been done in the region. And you spend all of your time talking to the leadership about all the different risks that are exposed. Now, where do you think that the business is going to get lost? The flip side of that is you go and take a look at the top business objectives that the organization has in the last board meeting or in the last key learnings session or the last leadership session. And you ultimately are trying to figure out what matters the most. The business outcomes you're trying to avoid, the business outcomes that you're trying to match or make more of. Great examples are I want to minimize safety incidents by X percentage. A great example is I want to minimize my non-productive time by Y percentage. Another example is I want to increase efficiencies at all these different sites by X amount. A great one would be I want to reduce the time that it takes in a cyber assessment from 4 days to 4 hours. So when you start thinking in business outcome language, the most important thing that you can then do is convert your overall program's reporting to specifically match to that. Now, go back in time with me when you standardized your overall framework or your standard. And if you can map the actual controls with your level of experience as a cyber expert, if you can match those cyber outcomes to the various cyber assessment questions, that's the standardization that the leadership is going to want. Paul, I see you've come back on. I know we have about 5 more minutes for time. I'm going to go through one more of the KLOs and then open up for questions. When you do these things very well, when you are able to tie everything back to visualizations, when you simplify the standard approach, and when you tie in folks at the actual shop level, what is going to happen is you are going to start to create a documented pattern of information flow. The assessment team is going to be engaging the different folks at the shop floor. They're going to start providing answers on a regular basis to you. And if you can compute that or translate that into reporting from your actual sites and report that up to leadership, what you're trying to do in this 180 days is simplify it enough that you can do the exact same type of assessment with the exact same functionality that you've deployed with a repeatable visualization cycle, but maybe you're assessing a different control. Maybe you're assessing different sites based on criticality. Now you've taken a simplified approach that you can repeat more often, more often, more often. And when you do that, what you're ultimately doing is you're tying corporate objectives to plant floors or to various sites. And what we just explained is not an easy process, but is rooted in simplicity, it's rooted in visualizations, and it's rooted in tying in everybody on a very key theme. And the number one thing that I would say people do great that are able to go from a one-time compliance assessment to a dynamic governance program where assessments are adding value every day is they are tying the overall cyber assessment and the controls they evaluate to the business outcomes. I will pause there and open it up for questions.
Yeah, we've got two let's see. So the first one, Ted, from Andrew. It's a little bit long. I'll try to get through this. And then we've got one other one from Martinez. So I've seen value in looking at every site. So I think it was talking about going to the locations. There can be sometimes surprisingly issues at some sites that need addressing that would be missed by checking just some of the sites. I've also been seen value in asking local staff at every location what they think is the biggest issue with the site. They can often point out something that might not be the same at other locations, chosen assessment criteria. Getting access to the right people is also important. Any insights to improve this further? It's a bit of a broad question. And then also, just so you have time, that Martinez was asking about why 180 days, why not 1 year, 1 quarter, from controls to actions. So
Sure.
questions.
Well, I'll take the first one. Appreciate the question. I think you're thinking about it the right way. When people think about cyber assessment, they immediately go and start thinking about threat-based or risk-based approaches, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I would say that the more simplified that you can make your approach, the wider you're going to be able to get that scale. And so I always say start slow, start small, crawl before you walk, walk before you run. Most people try to start too fast too early. The biggest thing that I would say is going to help you is truly have a vision of what multiple years are going to look like under your leadership. And when you start to kick off your cyber assessment, I think you had a great idea. It's like, let's ask the sites what they think is most important. Let's ask leadership how they, what have been the failures of the past. Um, I think that a wider scope at a smaller controls is just a faster way to start getting some real value. It doesn't mean you're going to be collecting every single data point that you need to be as secure as you need to be, but the best thing that I can do is truly create that vision. Instead of saying, hi, we're going to go do a cyber assessment in Q3, prepare. Say, look, we are in a 5-step journey that's going to take us 2 years. And in the next 180 days, we're going to start our assessment program with a 30-point questionnaire. That 30-point questionnaire is going to have all these different people mapped to it. And when we get done visualizing that and sending it to leadership, we're going to go and add 15 more points to that. And those points could be risk-based questions, they could be compliance-based questions, or they could be controls. So I think you're thinking about it the right way, but this I'll bridge to the next question, which why only 180 days? Usually, the reason that I say 180 days, 150 days, 1 quarter, 2 quarters, is because the magic of making a cyber assessment turn from a one-time activity that probably is over budget and not on time, and turn it into a cyclical program that keeps repeating effortlessly, is tie your remediation, recommendation, budget ask within the same year as your assessment. And that is why I would always say your program should be, 100 to 180 days. What do I mean by that? I mean that the smartest folks that I've seen out there, it's 2025 right now, and they're going to ask for budget for all of 2026. And they already did a cyber assessment this year that was able to dictate all of the next year's cyber control or cyber remediation budgets, and they're able to actually complete purchases to the same year model. And why that matters is because what ends up happening is you do such a big assessment, it takes you all year. You have to wait an entire budget cycle to get the budget to go fix the things that you needed to remediate. If you can short circuit that by saying, hey boss, how much money do I have to spend this calendar year? Or how much budget are you willing to give me next calendar year? And reverse engineer your assessment by scope and size to fit within that, you are guaranteeing that leadership will be a proponent for good by being able to say that in recognition that we have an X amount of budget next year, we've tailor fit our cyber assessments with the support of all of our leadership on the ground to be able to address the various control families that we think are really, truly putting us most at risk and within our budget cycle. So that's why I would recommend that timeline.
Yep. Thank you very much. We do have the next session. Hate to cut it short. Outstanding presentation. As always, Ted. Always love your insights. Thank you very much.